as long as I am the kind of father that gives my kids what they need, not what they want, then I am the best person.
That's awesome, man. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. We represent underrepresented stories of sobriety and recovery from within the BIPOC community on this podcast. And this is a particularly special day for a few different reasons. Number one, for those of you who follow the show, you recognize that most of my conversations are virtual. So as you can see, I'm sitting here beside somebody else. Number two, we're actually in Kenya right now. Of all places, for two brothers to be sitting down and talking about our journey, we couldn't think of a better place to do it than in Africa, as you can see by the continents on the wall behind us. And then number three, just really excited to talk to this brother beside us. For those of you who don't know, this is Chris Marshall. He does many things in this space, but fundamentally speaking, he is someone who's been on his own journey for quite some time now. So we're going to get into all of those things and just kind of highlight a few points that I know that we're going to touch on. Entrepreneurialism. I'm sure we're going to touch on, family. I'm sure we're going to touch on a lot of drivers behind, what makes Chris who he is. And also what we really want to talk today about is community. And I think that's probably a through line that we'll see that kind of runs throughout Chris's story. So without further ado, Chris, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I think this is the first podcast I've done in person too.
Really?
First or second, I think. Yeah.
Well, good. We're honored.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's get right into it and not waste any time. I know folks want to know your story, so maybe we can take it all the way back to kind of the origin of your relationship with alcohol, and we'll just probably progress chronologically from there up until where you are today.
Yeah. So I had my first drink at 16, and before that, I had made a decision not to drink alcohol. I was one of those kids who grew up in a fairly religious home and said, you know what, alcohol is never going to be part of my story until I at least turn 21. And then I just found myself really alone in middle school and high school. I was more often than not one of the few, if not only, the person of color. I was the only person of color in my social circles and Boy Scouts. The only place I wasn't the only one was in church. So being excluded and feeling alone just was this constant thing for me. And the first drink I ever had was with a group of my friends who were all white. And they had all had their first drinks. And there was just this moment of feeling like this is what I needed to do to belong, that I had to sacrifice a bit of who I was to become part of this guy group of boys, right? And in that moment, I just decided to do it. And I've talked to those guys since. And
still friends with them to this day, or just
casual, keeping up. But when I first got sober, I went back and talked to those guys. And they were like, Chris, we have no memory of that day. And for me, it's this crystallized, fixed moment. It is a rite of passage. It is an initiation into manhood. And I just remember feeling so certain about what I was doing, even though I knew I was betraying my own values. I was like, this is a moment for me. And the first thing I remember taking the first sip of hot beer, nasty hot beer, taking that first sip, and the first thing I remember was feeling disgust, because it was gross. But then I felt this connection. I felt like I had done something. I had an experience. And that experience taught me that alcohol was a way to connect. So that's what I did. Even though I didn't like the way that I was feeling when I was drinking, I didn't like the consequences. I immediately got in trouble. I think the second time I drank, I got a DUI.
Really?
At 16, totaled my mom's car. Yeah, I had all these consequences immediately. But for me, all the consequences were worth that being a connection. Worth it. So I just kept doing it.
Really? at the time, I mean, and I can understand that because it's interesting too, because like, you know, we can't act like alcohol doesn't promote connection, because I think for a certain period of time, it actually does. I mean, I have a similar, story to you where, when I first started drinking, it was to find community outside of my home, find somewhere where I felt like I belonged, because I didn't feel like I belonged in my home as much as I, would have wanted to at, 13, 14 years old. But it certainly runs its course really quickly. And what I'm think about is, those guys who I was hanging out with, at 12, 13 years old, were they seeking the same things that I was seeking? Or was I kind of alone in that? Right. I don't know. But I guess the question that I have for you is, were some of your friends, now that you kind of went back to them in retrospect and have had these conversations, did they have their own moments of epiphany? Was that also a connection moment for them? And more importantly, was it a problem for them? Similar to how maybe you, at that point in time, envisioned it being a problem for you.
I think they realized some of those friends realized that they ended up having a problem with alcohol, but for most of them, they felt comfortable in that world.
Mm-hmm.
This was their world, right? I was the
you were the only one.
I was the only one, right? So I was the one that always felt uncomfortable. They felt, comfortable at the country club and at on the soccer fields, hanging out. I mean, this was their work, and I was a guest. And I realized just now when you were talking that I don't think alcohol creates connection; it creates cohesion.
What do you mean by that?
I think what alcohol does is, because it dulls the activity in our prefrontal cortex, we know this to be true, right? That's the decision-making part of our brains. It turns that down and it turns it off. So we're not as judgmental about ourselves and about others. That's the feeling of freedom that we get. But it doesn't create real bonding, real connection. It just creates what we identify as the sense of cohesion. Mm-hmm. You can sit down at a bar with a stranger, have a drink, and you feel this sense of cohesion. I think it's not connection, right? I don't know that person. Yeah. And when we're done having that drink at the bar, I would probably keep up with them, right? Yeah. It doesn't create real heart-to-heart connection. It doesn't create that. It creates cohesion. The same way flying on a plane and having a conversation with someone will do. That's not connection. You're there. You're stuck together. So I think there's a difference between cohesion and connection. I think alcohol is a great cohesive material, but a poor connection.
Yeah. When you say that, I think about a lot of the early friendships that I friendships that I had in my life at that time when I started, and how none of them exist to this day. So it begs you to kind of question how authentic were those relationships, and if you spent a fair amount of time, drinking and having those cohesive connections with people, then in reality, did you have any, real friendships, any real, partnerships, at a young age? I mean, and just thinking about it now that you've kind of positioned that way, I'm like, man, probably not, which is unfortunate, because you can go through a significant portion of your life never really experiencing that close human connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I craved. I think we all crave that. And that's why we keep doing it, especially into adulthood, even though we know alcohol does not give us the sense of connection or satisfaction that we're looking for. We just keep going to it because that's the only thing we know. But I think that when we start to parse away cohesion from connection, we're able to see that alcohol is not serving us in the way that we think it is. And if we go back and evaluate those relationships, we see that there's nothing substantive about it. There's nothing that lasts about those friendships. I do have some friends who I went to college with that continue to drink up in college. Mm-hmm. That I was in weddings and things like that, but I don't know how they're doing today. Mm-hmm. When I'm having a bad day, I'm calling them.
Right.
Kids are.
And they're not calling you either.
They're not calling me either. And we'll talk about kids and talk about relationships and talk about. I don't reach out to those guys. Talk about sports, yeah, sure. But talk about real stuff, no. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly resonate with that. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are listening who probably see that in their own stories as well. Talk to me a little bit about what that progression looked like. So now you're in college, right? And I know that you were able to part ways with alcohol at a relatively young age.
Yeah.
I mean, I stopped drinking when I was 41.
Hmm.
I'm 43.
Hmm.
You know, that's pretty, you know, that's a lifetime right there for some, right? Tell me about what it looked like up onto the point where you recognized, okay, I got to do something differently here because it's certainly not serving me. And what were some of the motivators and some of the drives behind that sentiment that you were feeling?
Yeah, I mean, and I always want to clarify this. I wasn't some uh, super prescient young adult.
Mm.
I wasn't some wise kid who realized alcohol. No, I couldn't keep drinking. The goal was to drink until I was about 40 or 50, but my body just could not withstand it. So I think that that's an important thing. I didn't have some, epiphany. My body just could not sustain the alcohol. So I did not graduate high school. Uh, I barely got out of there. I had to graduate this summer because of my drinking. I was drinking at school, in high school. Um, Went to college at the only school that would accept me, and immediately fell into Greek life.
Okay, because they don't drink in Greek.
Never. This is water society, right? The first thing that I found in college was Greek life, and it was a bunch of young men, saying, "Hey, brothers, let's be brothers. Let's connect. Let's be friends." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly the thing that I've been chasing since I was 16. This is perfect." Um, and immediately got wrapped up into that world. And alcohol is 24/7. And I thankfully was around some, 20 year olds who were like, "Chris, you're not drinking for the same reasons we're drinking. Like we're playing drinking games and we're doing keg stands because we want to have fun.
Yeah.
You're drinking for another reason. When it's 6 a.m. and everyone's waking up, you're still drinking, cleaning up, drinking empties. You're not drinking for the same reasons we're drinking." And at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. But what I know now to be true is that I was drinking to fill this ever expanding hole inside of me, this feeling of loneliness, this feeling of isolation. That's what I was drinking to fill. And I kept scooping all this alcohol into my body, trying to fill this thing, and it would just never, ever, ever be full.
It's like a never ending chasm. You just keep dropping it in and there's no bottom.
The thing that I was drinking to fill me was empty. And a lot of those guys, to their credit, 19, I don't know if I was that, but some of those guys were like, "Nah, man, you're not drinking for the same reason we're drinking." So I was just on a faster downwards, slope. And at 23, found myself in treatment for the first time. Had the shake
voluntary entry for you.
Circumstances made it, necessary. Let's say it that way. I was shaking when I was drinking. When I did have a drink, the second I had a sip of alcohol, my shakes would stop. I was having seizures when I stopped drinking, so I was physically dependent on alcohol at 23. At 22 at the time. Went to treatment and immediately found every reason why I did not belong there. I was 20 years old. So I don't have it. Haven't lost anything. I don't have a family, a wife, a job. I don't have these things to lose. Why do I need to be here?
Yeah.
And quickly checked myself out of rehab that first time and said, "You know what? I don't need this." And the counselor said, "You're going to be that. So you want that."
Was this a rehab in any association with your school, or is this a third?
I had already failed out of. I had failed out of school, out of college. I was out of there.
Okay. So you're trying to figure things out at this point. Like, how do I get back on track?
Right. I went to college in San Antonio, moved back to Houston, which is where I was from, and was living with my mom at 23. No real goals or aspirations, just trying to get from one drink to the next. So I went to rehab, and that counselor said, "You need to be back." And I was like, "Oh, you want to bet?" And so every 30 days, I called him and said, "I'm still sober." I hung up the phone. And that's all I was saying. I'm still sober. Hung up the phone. And then around day 90 of that first time, I was like, "I'm still sober." I was miserable.
Yeah.
I wanted to drink so bad, but just out of spite, despite this one person. Of all the billions of people in the world, I was just him, just you. And I was miserable because of it. And I drank again, December of 2006, and then I went into treatment for the last time in February 2007.
That's deep, man. You were holding on, white knuckling it, and yeah. What do you think changed between that first, attempt and when you kind of, went back and to learn some more about your relationship and the second attempt?
Yeah,
That that you've remained sober from since.
yeah. I think the difference was, and that's a great question, is that I realized that I was the first time I was doing it, despite that person, which was childish.
Right.
But not the first. I'm not the first person to do that. Second of all, I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was white knuckling it because everyone else wanted me to get sober, and I felt like part of the reward for me not drinking should be people coming back into my life. Okay, I'm not drinking. Ex-girlfriend come back into my life. Friends, fraternity brothers, everyone should be back here. And people were just not ready to come back into my life. Most of all, because I had damaged so many relationships. My alcohol use that I used to connect became the thing that pushed people away. I became so unlikable, so just awful as a person. I was weird to say, but I was about to say, I was like, doesn't even sound like me anymore, but I was a fighter, dude. I would go to bars, and I remember just picking on people and looking for fights, bumping into people, and just getting kicked out of bars in San Antonio. Just ready to fight, just looking for something, just needing just that.
We'll get to this, and I want to fast forward and we'll come back. But there's a lot of anger there, right? Where is that anger today?
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to a place? Because I don't know that, Chris.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known of you for a while. I've followed you from afar. We've come into contact with each other recently, and then spent a lot of time here in Kenya together. But I could never watch. I can't imagine Chris being the guy who's walking through the bar shoulder bump people just to see who's going to get a rise out of. So where did that anger go, and how do you deal with it today?
Oh, that's a good question. So you want to answer that now? Or you want to?
I want to park it,
okay,
but I do want to address it when we get there.
Yeah. So I mean, I realized I was doing it for the wrong reasons. Decided to go to treatment, and I found myself really alone. And I remember the intake counselor asking me how suicidal I felt, and I was like, "Hello, what are you talking about?" She's like, "Because what you're doing is slowly killing yourself." And I was like, and when I went into treatment, and it just everything, the universe just worked out everything perfectly because I met someone in there who was an alumni of the treatment center. His name's Chris too, and he said, how connected do you feel? And I was like, connected to what? Do you feel a part of anything? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not a part of anything, a group or family. And it's like, I want you to know that you belong, that you're a part of something, that you matter. And that's the first time anyone had ever invited me to belong without wanting something from me. I think my friends in high school wanted a token black guy as a friend, and I endured the slings and arrows of microaggression, racism, hearing jokes about black people hanging from trees and thinking like, okay, it's the price you got to pay.
Right.
I endured being in a fraternity and being the one who would always do the crazy thing or always be the one that was willing to do the thing that no one else is willing to do. That was my role, and that's what people wanted from me. And the first time I moved into the roots of recovery, no one wanted me to do anything except heal and grow. They didn't want anything from me. There was nothing I could give them. And that's how I knew I was safe enough to get better.
And you knew that in the moment when you.
I mean, almost. I was waiting for this my whole life. I was waiting for the sense of like, man, just who you are is good enough. You don't have to be extra. You don't have to be on. You don't have to pretend to like to drink. You don't. If you're not okay, that's okay too.
Yeah.
If you're not in a good space, say it. Like, you don't ever have to drink again if you don't want to. And that's that's when I started to feel that connection, right? Real connection. Because I realized that it wasn't about just sharing um, these wild experiences with people. It wasn't about what I could do or how I could perform for people, but it was just holding space for other people and people holding space for me. That to me is the connection that I was looking for when I took that first drink at 16.
That's deep, man. And I can understand where you're coming from. You know, when I hear from folks who, you know, haven't been able to experience true connection, true support, you know, an audience that sees them for who they are, you know, I always wonder, you know, where the origin families play in all of these narratives. And I know that you don't talk about your family that much, so if it's something you don't want to get into, just let me know. But I am curious, you know, as you're developing as a young man, you know, moving into, you know, the space of a teenager and ultimately onto college, as you're dealing with these personas that you're having to like prop up, like what role is your family playing in this? Whether it be attempted support, whether it actually be support, whether it be, you know, neglect, like what does that look like for you as you're trying to identify your place in the world?
It's a really good question. My mom's a single parent. I think that had a lot to do with it. My dad,
Single
working mom, who, my dad, like, my dad suffered with schizophrenia, and my parents divorced because of my dad's mental illness, and I blame myself for my dad getting sick. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but I felt like some of my behaviors as a kid impacted him enough for him to get sick. Of course, none of that's true. He was going to get sick no matter what. But
as a kid, we are the center of the universe, and everything kind of bounces off us, and it's because of us.
Right. So and kids internalize divorce and their parents separating anyways. That's just something that happened. So it just so happened that, you know, I had been the apple of my dad's eye. My first memory of life, the first thing I can remember is my dad was a boxer, perimeter boxer, and big frame, 6'8", huge guy, and he was jogging with me on his shoulders as a maybe 4 or 5 year old kid. I was sitting on top of this boulder of a man. As the sun was coming up. That's the first thing I remember about this time around in this life, right? That's what I remember. And so my dad was my hero. And I know that he loved me so much. And he had a fish tank that he loved. He was his prize. You know, now I'm a dad. I understand, like, you value your things, right? As a dad, you like, it's your thing, whatever it is. If it's your technology, your equipment, or your car, you got things you value. And so for him, his value was in this fish tank that he just took really good care of. It was beautiful. It was huge, this huge thing, like a big screen TV almost. And I was running through the house and I broke the fish tank, and everything just spilled out. And I at 5 years old equated breaking that with breaking him, because in my mind, and now I know it's probably a year later, that he started exhibiting signs of schizophrenia. You know, hiding in the attic, running away from us, not knowing who we were, all these things which terrified, I think, my family, terrified, you know, him.
Yeah. Because he doesn't have control over it. So there's one man that is, you know, very set in who he is, his values, and then his mental illness doesn't allow him to live in his true self.
Right. And I believe that in another timeline, he never gets sick, and he goes on to probably continue to box and probably pass it on to me, but also just be a good dad. He was a great dad, and I just blame myself, and so I condemned myself to a life where I wasn't worthy of connection. I was like, hey, that's what you do, Chris. When you care about me, you're great. At 5, I believe that about myself fundamentally. So you ask me where that anger comes from. It wasn't anger; it was fear. Fear is just anger is just fear back against the wall. Right? So that anger that was coming out when I was drinking was just this overarching fear that everyone that I would get close to would get hurt. So that's why I would set out to hurt people.
Yeah.
When I was angry, when I was drunk, and I was just acting out what I believed to be true about who I was at the core.
Yeah. I get all of that, man. And it begs my subsequent question, where you've now gone through rehab, you're re-entering, you're integrating into a life that is unfamiliar to you, and you've got all of these kinks in the armor and all of this work that needs to be done. How in the world did you go ahead and pursue that? Because I mean, that's like the lifelong journey right there.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, and again, like I don't know Chris to be the one who's bumping people off in tight spaces.
Right.
How did you start working through these things and starting to address that fundamental, kind of narrative within yourself that, you have to repel people in order to effectively keep them and you safe?
Yeah. I mean, it was almost like the people in my life and the people in my circle when I first got sober were just not, they kind of jailbroke that system. They just overrode it with so much kindness and care. And it's like I couldn't fight against it. Even when I would try to like prove my own theory right that people didn't care about me, these people would show up. I remember going every Friday night. We'd go out and after the meeting, alumni meeting, go out to this Mexican restaurant that served like the worst Tex-Mex food. It wasn't even, it was horrible. But it was about being there and being in community. I remember one time I just wasn't feeling it. And I just like walked out and Chris came back and said, "Hey man, what's going on? I don't want to be here, man. This sucks. I'm around all these little people and I don't I'd rather, I'm 23 years old, man. I should be out on the town. I'm in Houston. Actually haven't. He's like, man, if you want to go home, I'll take you home.
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
gotta make a decision.
That's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear you get your butt back in there. You connect with these people. And it was like, nah, man. If that's what you're on, that's what you're on. And I'll take you home. And he took me home. He stopped everything he was doing, and took me home. So we'll see you next week. And it was like things like that. The people just kept loving on me, even when I didn't feel love. People kept caring about me, even though I didn't feel like I was worthy of being cared for. And that empty hole that kept growing, and I kept putting alcohol in the fill, started to cement with care and compassion. And I felt myself filling up and becoming a different person. So that's why I was when I mentioned about the aggressiveness and looking for fights, it is almost laughable because I'm like, how was I even that person? I don't recognize that person anymore. And I think that's the power of community. It saved my life. It literally saved my life. It healed that 5-year-old version.
That's a fantastic paradigm shift to come to, and it seems as though like you couldn't deny where it was taking you. And I'm glad you embraced it, because I think there's a lot of folks that, regardless of how strong that pull might have been, they're pulling in the opposite direction, right? Because that is what they know, versus walking into the unknown and saying, you know what, I trust this. Trust is a concept and a word that has been coming up for me quite a bit over the last 10 days. And, part of trust is just relinquishing that control. And control is something that's been coming up for you.
Right.
I mean, it's, these last 10
days. I think trust and control are brothers, at best, if not twins. And when I feel that I can trust, I can relinquish control. But when I feel fear creep in, control is the thing that I take back to drive my life. And so trust is the goal. Trust is the way that we want to live. But I think it takes time. It takes experiences to get there, right? Yeah.
Did you find it harder or easier to trust others versus trusting yourself? Or did they both kind of come in tandem? Or did you need one in order to kind of get closer to the other?
I definitely had to trust myself first. One of the first trips I ever took when I was sober, I was maybe 3 or 4 months sober, and I lucked into this like press association thing. Like I was working for a local newspaper in Houston, and I got selected as a fellow. I still don't really even understand how it worked, but I got to go to Chicago, and I was 20. So this is like the first like business trip I've ever been on. 23 years old, you know. And I go to the hotel room, and there's a mini bar.
Mm.
And here I am
Your name.
in Chicago. No one knows me. Now my boss is in the at the conference, and other than that, no one else knows me. And I think that I could probably sneak a few drinks that she wouldn't have known, right? I would have known, but she wouldn't have known. And that was the moment of truth, right? Like no one's watching. What are you gonna do when no one can see but you? You're not gonna say. Just have a couple sips and no one will know. And I remember just like opening that thing and opening up that door and like, here it is. And just deciding not to. And that was the first time I like could trust myself around alcohol, and trusting myself helped me to trust others, I think. But yes, also people just trusting and believing in me. Small things like my mom was like, look, if you can do this, I'll give you a car. And I had to build a life back, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna do right by my mom. Giving me this car is a huge gift. And slowly just building up trust and building up community within others and himself. So it's kind of like this hand in hand thing that went there.
I love that you highlighted that pivotal moment though, because for anybody who's, given up alcohol and, has been able to sustain that path, there's that moment where you're just like, okay. And it's important because it gives you the assurance that you can make that call for yourself again if you need to, and again if you need to, right?
Yeah.
I love that. I want to ask you something that is kind of more racial in nature. Being that you're from Texas and it is a pretty polarized state, what was the recovery ecosystem like for you as a Black man in Texas and trying to accept this care for what I'm assuming was predominantly white people who and again, correct me if I'm wrong, have been the perpetrators of a lot of your pain up until then. So like, what was that experience like for you?
Weird, really weird, really weird. I just had to accept it. And I think that I wanted to live more than I wanted to feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was, it's unfortunate that I had to make that wager, but I guess I had to decide whether I wanted to be comfortable or wanted to live. But I wanted to live. At some point I decided I wanted to live. And so, yeah, I had to endure being called boy at a meeting.
Really?
As a grown man. Being told that my concerns about, I remember one time I had a job interview and I was just frustrated, trying to get a good job, trying to land something. And I said, sometimes I wonder if I'm not getting a call back because of my color. And some old timer in the room pulled me aside and said, that's an outside issue. We don't talk about that stuff here. You want to talk about that stuff? You talk about that with your people, but you don't bring that. You talk about that. And so I had to leave my blackness at the door. And I hated it. But at the same time, like I wanted to live.
Yeah.
And it also gave me, and I think that's where Sandsbar, I think was the seeds of Sandsbar were planted, right? Because I wanted to have a place where that never happened. That became part of my like desires. Like, okay, you need to have a space where people don't have to leave any parts of themselves at the door.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it just sucked. It sucked. I mean, there's no way around it. But I also found a lot of people who were kind, who did care. I found a lot of, that's the thing about your podcast and what I love what you do is that there were a lot of Black people, Black men especially, who've been around for, I've been sober 50, 60 years. And they definitely pulled me aside and was like, hey man, like, There's the recovery from alcohol and drugs, and then there's the recovery from the life you've been living, where you're the only one in spaces. And that's my experience. I mean, there was a lot of good men who just pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, like this isn't easy for us, but you just know that I want you to hear the similarities and not the differences, and find what works for you and find the spaces that work for you." And so, yeah, it was always this thing, this wonderful way that I was cared for by Black folks and people of color, Hispanic folks who live in Texas. A lot of great Hispanic people in the rooms who also felt many of those same things, those microaggressions, and they just pulled me inside. It's like, hey, man, you belong here. Especially being so young. That was not only was I Black, but also very, very young. And I was often the only, young person in the meeting. And people would be like, "Man, I spilled more alcohol than you ever drank." Like this, some crazy, like what? It means you're just a sloppy drunk. I didn't spill anything. Yeah, it just things like that would just happen a lot. So it was like I never felt quite safe in spaces because I felt like there was always that difference, right? That little thing that was just always keeping me from feeling like I really belong in those spaces.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that that's a tussle, that we have to engage in this, society, whether you're, a woman of color or a man of color. But I do think it's an honorable tussle in that you were willing to engage with the discomfort for your own preservation and and growth.
Yeah.
And that's just like a very honest, kind of, fork in the road to come to. And again, make that decision to say, you know what, I know what both of these roads look like,
right,
and I'm going to take this road, even knowing all the shit that I'm going to have to deal with on it. So I mean, shout out to you on that for sure. Which leads me to Zanzibar. Can you talk a little bit about Zanzibar, a little bit about its origin story, why it came about? I recall on a call that I was with you on, we were on together at one point, and you were talking about a young man who had, come to Zanzibar and just couldn't bring himself to step inside, and you ended up kind of rendezvousing with him at a later, date. Can you talk a little bit about that too? Because that really stuck with me, and I think it really kind of crystallizes, the community that you built in the safe space that you created.
Yeah, within that community. It's a great story, and for the people who have never heard of Zanzibar, it's a alcohol-free space that I created back in 2017, and it.
And considered by many the first non-alcoholic space in the country.
In North America, yeah. Which, yeah, sure.
Take it, man.
Take it. Sure. I think of it as just the space. And yeah, so, I mean, it has its place in history. I won't deny that. I think it's important. But for me, it might have opened in 2017, but it started in 2007.
Oh, well, okay.
When I got sober, and those group of guys, or group of people, this wasn't just men, a group of people would just gather around me, right, and just love on me, and we had that exciting experience of always having something to do and somewhere to be. Mm-hmm. That was the early seeds of that. So as much as people want to credit me for something, I have to credit all those people whose shoulders I stood on in those early days, who taught me how to just grow up in public, who taught me how to just look people in the eye when you're having conversations, or just taught me that it's okay to say no. Like, those things are important, and they were building blocks. So speed run through my story. After I got sober, I realized I had a whole lot of life to live. I did not anticipate living past 25. I thought I was going to be dead by then. So it was a big surprise that I was sober at 23. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, now what? So I took an aptitude test. They said you should go back to school and become either a firefighter, I think a preacher,
okay,
a teacher, or a counselor.
Where did you take this aptitude test?
I took local community college.
Okay.
And it was like,
it's like, go get yourself a vocation, guys.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, I don't like the idea of being a firefighter. It sounds like too much work.
No.
Preacher, no, I'm come from a pretty preacher heavy household family. Everyone in my household's an educator. Counselor sounds interesting. So I went back to school, went back to college, became a counselor, and I was doing that for about 6 or 7 years. And as I was working with people, I realized that the same kind of person was coming into my office all the time. And it was hundreds of people, but I saw the through line. The through line was these were adults who needed a space to connect.
Right.
Not to just feel that cohesive feeling that was empty and hollow the second that they left the experience, but that would linger and last beyond whatever time they were in the space. And so I just kept doing the counseling thing, and then I recognized that we needed a physical space, and that's where Sandspark came from. I had a client who was very intelligent, highly motivated, super just light of the world kind of person. And on a Friday night, we kind of wrapped up, did a check-in with this patient, and said, "Hey, what's going on with you?" And she said, "Hey, I want to be sober. I know I need to be sober, but I know that if I quit drinking, I'm giving up all my friends and all my social situations. By profession, I have a profession that needs to be around people who are drinking, and a lot of deals go down during that time. So I just don't know what to do." That was a Friday night. On a Monday morning, I come back to work and find out that person had died in a driving accident. And for me, that was the break. That was the thing that took this from being an idea to something I had.
Yeah.
So I created this physical space, started a series of pop-ups, from the pop-ups to a brick and mortar in May of 2018. And so the space is incredible, and the idea is that it's all the bar without the booze. And the person we were talking about was my buddy John. He now is a good friend, but 2018 he was a nervous guy. Knew that he needed to stop drinking, but had no idea how to do that. Knew that AA and the 12 steps were not for him, but didn't know what else to do. And so he would drive by Sands Bar on the weekends and just look inside and see all these people dancing and laughing and doing karaoke and having a good time. And he just couldn't bring himself to come in. So one time he was walking by, and I'm like, "You want to come in here?" And he was like, "Sure." And we just talked. And I remember just like you and I are talking, right? Listening as much as I am talking, and hearing his story. And I remember a very clear point of that where he just kind of and he relaxed, and it's like, "Let me get you a drink." And John's the norm of the bar, kind of like Cheers. You get the regular, or what's Simpsons, Barney at Moe's bar. He's there all the time, and he's become a Sands ambassador at Sands Bar, and just speaks so highly of it every time that he gets a chance to, because he is exactly what I created Sands Bar for, was for people to find that space and find their group of friends that they go and do things with all the time.
I love that. That story resonated when I heard it the first time. His name, John, actually also stuck with me too. So thanks for appreciate that. Fantastic work you're doing there. I wanted to flip the script quickly back to the personal. Right? So you've created this outward community, and many people, I'm sure, that you're intimately, have relationships with, and very much connected to, their well-being. Mm-hmm. On the flip side of that, you have like Chris, like Marshall, the personal Chris Marshall, right? And now I know you're married, you have 2 children. How did you go about pursuing and building that space for yourself, coming from a unit that was untraditional, like one most people maybe haven't experienced? Like, what did it look like for you to create a friendship and then, a matrimony? What did it look like for you to start growing your own family, being a father and a male figure in your own family?
Yeah. So that's another great question. I was very fortunate to have a lot of good roadmaps, a lot of good people in my life, men in my life, uncles who may not have been the most affection and most like they never really stepped into the role of my dad, which I'm really grateful. I used to really yearn for that as a kid, but now I get like so much of it was like we're just gonna model for you what being a dad, what being a husband, what being a community leader looks like. We're gonna just model that for you, and when you're ready, you've been seeing it your whole life. My grandfather, who's still living, thankfully, was a good example of that, and just really taught me um, that the only thing I have in this world that's mine is my name, and that's everything, and just to build something that I'm proud of. And so I just watched as my uncles and my grandfather built things, and it inspired me to do the same thing. So I was often worried about that. Would I repeat the cycle of my dad? And what I realized is that I get to break the cycle of my dad. I get to be a present father. I get to be there in a way that I think he really wants to be. I think he really, really wants to be there. And in fact, uh, once I got sober, I made amends to my dad. And I just carried so much anger towards him. And it wasn't him, it was the illness. It was his schizophrenia, that thing. But I made these amends to him, and so our calls over 15, more like a decade of me being sober and him being alive looked like just these 30-second to a minute calls. Like, hey dad, hey Chris, I'm going. Just want to let you know, I'm thinking about you, care about you. And in his own way, he was as present as he could. And when he passed in 2019, I felt like he had done everything he could to teach me how to be a good dad. Because it's not about being everything your kids think they want from you. It's about being the dad that they need you to be. And I think that as a kid, as a child, I wanted my dad to be someone else. And what I think I got was the dad that I needed. So when he was gone, I didn't feel any guilt. I still, um, I'm not angry at him. Like I made my peace with him. And I miss even the ability to talk to him still. I feel like so much of what he gave me was not what I wanted, but what I needed. I think that is my number one goal as a father. I think most people have issues with their parents because they expect their parents to be the thing that they want.
Yeah.
And what you fail to realize, or what I fail to realize, is that both my parents were exactly what I need to be. I would not be talking to you now if my parents were any different.
Yeah.
Everything that they did was to make me who I am today, or better or worse. Things I need to work through and grow from could not have happened had a different set of parents. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
Exactly.
it certainly answers the question. I mean, I think that's an important line of sight to bring to the audience's attention. And certainly, like, I appreciate you saying that because, we would not be where we are today had it not been for everything that has, preceded this moment. And part of that are the people who reared us, and their involvement or the lack thereof. Right. So I hear that 100%. I appreciate that. We're going to start wrapping it up. As I like to say, take the plane in for a landing here. So I got a couple more questions for you. And these are pretty straight down the middle standard questions. One question is, what surprised you, or what did you learn about yourself in sobriety that you didn't initially know?
I don't know. I mean, I think it just sounds so cliche, but I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is just that I'm a good person and I'm worthy of these things. Like I'm worthy, and um I'm good enough just being me. Like again, I don't have to have something to offer people, or just I can just be me and be it in the moment. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't think that Any other answer would be true to me.
Mhm.
I think that if I'm just thinking about it just now in this moment, the big part of this trip is just not wearing any of the hats,
Mhm.
right? Not being the non-alc guy or being the whatever, but just being myself.
Yeah.
And, this has been a great trip because of that. I rarely am just Chris.
Here I am pulled back to a podcast
No, this is good because rarely people ask me about my personal journey. Usually, it is about the business and business models and what do you think the industry is doing. And I don't mind answering those questions. I'm grateful to be the recipient of those questions. Right. I've been sober almost 17 years, and so yeah, people ask me a lot of questions about sobriety, and I love answering those questions. But I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to really reflect about how especially my dad, how great of a dad he was, and I just I've never thought about that. And I wish you could see. And I know he did. I know that's one thing. I know that because I've been doing this for so long. But there was a time when he was able to see some of the press I got and things, and uh, I just hold a lot of space in my heart for the man that he was and how hard he fought.
Mhm.
He fought like hell
Yeah.
just to have that women call. I know that those 1 minute calls now I realize that those 1 minute calls, he had to pull himself together from whatever delusion he was in, whatever universe he was existing in, um, just to hold space for that 1 minute. And I can't think of a better place to let go of that, to let go of just any animosity or anything that I have. We talked about what we're going to leave here, what we're going to take with us. And I think what I want to take with me is just that as long as I am the kind of father that gives my kids what they need, not what they want, then I am the best part.
That's awesome, man. I wish I could end the podcast right there. But because that's a real honest moment. And I think that being here in Kenya has given us the space to try to tap into some of that stuff, and just be honest about it. So I appreciate you sharing outwardly. I know you're a pretty private guy for the most part. Um, last two questions. In some of your darkest days, uh, how would the folks around you have known that you were struggling without you telling them explicitly that you were struggling?
I mean, I think I have someone who has dysthymia, which is like low grade depression. I've had that diagnosis since I got sober, and some anxiety disorders. The number one tell is that I go inward. I just shut down. I don't really talk to people, and people in my life know that. My buddy John, it's one of those people that's like, "You good?
Yeah.
All right?" Because you just don't. You're starting to kind of
Fade away.
And I think that's something that I and I wish there was a better alarm that I had or that better tell. I don't. I have that one thing that says I'm not okay when I start shutting down like that. So that was, I would say that's the number one thing that without me saying anything is a good indication that I'm not okay. And so I keep a regular communication with people. And when I stop doing that, that's a good sign that I'm not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is long, and I've told people about that, and I think that's an important thing that for a lot of people that struggle with mental health stuff, the hardest part is to say, here's how you know I'm struggling.
Right.
Because that is what helps people help you.
Yeah.
You got to say, here is what it looks like. Maybe the thing is to stop working, or you sleep more, sleep less. Like any of those symptoms are things that I need you to know I'm having trouble, and I don't always say it out loud. These are the things that you can look for. So yeah, but clearly for me, that's the number one thing. Is I shut down. Uh, I may keep doing work stuff, but I usually don't open up. You know.
Yeah, I asked that question, and there's obviously no right answer to the question because it's an individual, and it's very subjective. But I asked that question because I feel like, particularly in our community, we keep so much close to the chest, and we don't talk about things. And we hear all these stories about, someone, did this to themselves, or they ended up here, and it's just after the fact. It's like, well, what were the signs? So I think it's at an individual level. I think it's important for us to understand for ourselves when we're not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for other people to just generally have a sense of what it looks like when other people around you are not okay.
Yeah, and I think that just having the presence of mind to ask people if they're okay,
Yeah.
and if they're really okay, is an important thing. Because when you can hear, yeah, I'm okay, yeah, I'm good 1,000 times, but the first time you hear that no,
Yeah.
it makes it worthwhile to ask 1,000,000 times over, right? Like the first time I asked them, are you good? Are you really good? And they're like, no, I'm not. That makes it worth it, right? And so if you're listening to this and you're struggling, let someone know. I always tell people, like, you don't have to be 100% honest with everyone in your life.
Yeah.
But if you're 1% honest with 100 people, you'll be all right. Meaning, like, be honest let someone in on all parts of your life. Like, there should be someone who knows what's going on. So I may not feel comfortable telling my wife that I'm struggling, but I'll tell my therapist.
Right.
My therapist knows, or I may not feel comfortable telling my therapist, but one of my friends may know something's going on. Just make sure you're honest with someone. You may not, but you don't have to be 1,000% honest with one person. I think that's the fear that everyone gets. It's like, man, I'm struggling with my relationship. But if I tell my partner, then it wouldn't be good. So I need you to remember that you can also go tell a therapist or a trusted person, and that way you don't have to end everything just because you don't know how to handle this thing.
Yeah. It takes so much energy to hold energy, right? And to your point, just having there's even some of those micro outlets to let it out, because I feel like the human body can be a pressure cooker, and if you don't release that valve, and you can get to some pretty critical spaces where it's a little bit too far gone for you. So thank you for sharing that. Last question I have, for someone who's sitting out there right now, either watching this, listening to this, and mind you, this is going to last much longer, after we're gone. So we never know when this will touch someone's life, and this conversation will be heard. What would you say to the one person who's trying to address, their issue with alcohol, their, an addiction, a substance use disorder, however you want to categorize it, but they don't necessarily know what the first step is going to be or should be that they can take? What would you give? What a piece of advice would you give that person?
First of all, I've been asked this question hundreds of times, and I think the answer changes every time.
Okay.
So, and I don't know if that's just whatever I feel in the moment. And also, I think that there's a million different ways to get better.
Do something.
Yeah, there's a million first steps we can take, and I think that's something that is important to note here.
Mm-hmm.
That everyone's first step looks differently. But I think one thing that's just in this moment that's coming to mind is learn. Accept your humanity and give yourself grace. What do I mean by that? If your aim is to stop drinking, if you want to take a break from alcohol and you mess up, give yourself grace. Maybe you don't need to start your day count over. Maybe this is part of a longer journey. And it's not about consecutive days. It's about just making the decision and sticking with that decision that every single day I'm going to do better. I'm going to put the plug in the jug today.
Mm.
And if I do that 5 days out of 10, that's better than 0 out of 10. Every single day, I'm going to make up my mind to not regret the decision, which is something Alan Carr talks about. to not regret the decision, and to continue to go forward, never backwards. So every single day, that's what I'm making purposing in my mind. The other thing is that you can't do it alone. I think it's important to find someone in your life, again, even if it's not, professional, find someone in your life who you could just be accountable to. And so that you can say, hey, I'm struggling today. Hey, I'm doing good today. Hey, whatever it is, find a community. Doesn't have to be the close, doesn't have to be AA, but find some way to not do this alone.
Thank you, man. I want to make sure that folks can find you, follow you, and and keep their eyes open for all the good work that you will continue to do in the future. Because I know we've had some offline conversations, you got some stuff that you're cooking. So where can folks find you?
Just the samsbar.com. That's the easiest, best way to find me. I'm also on Instagram, sans_bar. And I really want to say this, and I mean it, and I want you to hear me. If there's anything I can do, and if you just want to reach out and just talk to someone, please reach out to me.
I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days, or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.